But for tonight, I should say a very warm welcome. A very warm welcome on a very cold night. We're a bit sort of reduced in numbers today, but there you go. It's to be expected. So you'll remember that for the last few weeks we've been looking at this very rich symbol called the Wheel of Life. It's a very powerful, very influential, very important symbol in what we might call Northern Buddhism, Tibet, China, Japan. You see it in all of those cultures. We've seen that at the center of this wheel, if you can see it, there are three animals representing our greed, hatred, and delusion. And the next ring outwards, we've heard, represents the law of karma. You'll see beings going upwards, becoming happier, becoming more beautiful inwardly, if not outwardly, through skillful actions of body, speech, and mind. And on the other side, the dark side of that inner ring, beings going downwards, becoming unhappier, more and more innerly ugly through unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind, descending to lower and lower states of suffering. And then we've heard about the rings around that, the ring around that, that sort of takes up most of the room, being divided into these 6 realms. 6 states of being, traditionally called realms, that we can all experience. So we've got the animal realm, a state in which we're just governed by biological drives, food, sex, safety, security, comfort. No higher values whatsoever, no higher culture whatsoever. We've got states of quite extreme suffering at the very bottom, the hell realm, states of extreme psychological suffering, extreme mental suffering, very, very painful mental states. We've got a realm called the realm of the hungry ghosts or pretas, where the beings are shown as having huge, great bellies, so representing huge appetites, but tiny necks, so their appetites can never be satisfied. So at its most extreme, this is the realm of addiction, desires that can never be satisfied. At a much less extreme, we could say it's the realm of the consumer society, always wanting more, never being satisfied with what we've got. Then we've got a realm above that, the realm of the Asuras, the Titans, a realm of big egos, competition, always trying to win. So beings who see existence as a competition, as a big fight for power, a big fight for influence, fight for status. And at the very top, we've got the realm of the Devas, a realm of refined pleasure with no suffering whatsoever. And then finally, at about 11 o'clock, we've got the human realm, the realm that we live in, hopefully most of the time, with perhaps excursions into some of the others. And we heard that these realms are traditionally seen as actual places. They're traditionally seen as actual places that we can be reborn in traditional Buddhism, according to our karma. But we can also see them as states of being that we probably all experience sometimes. And you can probably go out any day in Sheffield and find people who are in all of these states of being, except they probably won't let us in to the place where the gods hang out. We'd probably need sort of special ticket in there or something. So we've heard also that we could see this Wheel of Life as a sort of set of instructions for a computer game. So we could imagine this computer game as being set in this huge rambling castle with all sorts of chambers where you can play all sorts of sub-games. You can get points and find treasure and defeat enemies and so on. But none of that is the real point of the game. Any points we have is taken away from us. Any victories are meaningless. Any treasure will be taken away. Because the only real point of this game is to escape from the castle, which is actually a prison. And the real game only starts when we get out of it. It's only there to distract us from the real game, which happens outside it. Because what the wheel represents is the ultimate vicious circle. It shows the way that what's happened to us in the past, our conditioning, our history, the patterns we've got into, what the Dharma calls our samskaras, our deep habit energies, unless we do something about it, they all determine the way we act in the present. They determine the way we act in the present. And then the way we act in the present, by the law of karma, creates our future. So if we don't do something about it, our past creates our present. Our present creates our future, and we have a sort of locked cycle, a vicious circle, where we have no real choice in the matter. Our life lives us rather than us living our life. We're not determining the sort of person we are or the sort of life we live. So to have any freedom, any real freedom, to have any real choice about our life and the sort of world we live in, we've got to break out of it. We've got to break out of the vicious circle. Using the computer game analogy, we need to find the door out of the castle that leads to something much better. And that secret door, as we heard, is hidden. It's hidden in the human realm. So our first task in the game of spiritual life is to inhabit that human realm as much as we can. The human realm is the place that we can make the sort of spiritual progress that lets us escape from this endless round. In the human realm, there's just the right mixture of pleasure and pain, so we're not overwhelmed by pain and suffering as we are in some of the lower realms. But nor do we live in a world with no suffering whatsoever, as in the realm of the Devas. There's just enough suffering to give us an impetus, to allow us to make us want to practice, to want to escape. In the human realm, there's cooperation and empathy and metta, unlike the realm of the Asuras, the realm of the Titans, where it's all about competition. And in the human realm, there is culture and language and higher values, unlike in the world of the animals. So the human realm is the place to be. It's the place to start out. It's where the door is, the door out. So our first task is to be in the human realm, and then we can find the door. And the clues as to where that door is hidden are in the outer circle of the wheel. I'm not sure how well you can see this, but there are a sort of set of hieroglyphics around the edge of the wall. Can you make them out at all? No, I've described them. Okay. So we could say that this stuff around the edge is the sort of code to the computer game. It's the programming behind the game. It explains how it works, and it explains where the door is. So if I would go over there. So here, well, no, let's talk a bit more generally first. So I'm going to come back over here now. I'm just doing this to annoy him. So yeah, it's a description of how the wheel works. I'm sorry you can't see it a bit better, but there you go. It's traditionally divided into at least 3 bits, okay? So the bit up at the top right-hand bit, sort of 1 o'clock onwards, is traditionally said to represent the past life. So it represents the past life. We could say it just represents the past. It represents how the past has made us who we are. And then the second part is down the bottom. And down the bottom is said to represent the present life. We could say it just represents the present. Yeah, so, and the first part of the present life is just something that happens to us. It's done to us. It's our karma. In the second part, we start to have a certain amount of choice. We can be on autopilot and carry on doing what we normally do, and we'll go back round, or we can do something different, and we'll come to that. And then the third part of the wheel up, sort of 11, 10 o'clock, is the future life. That's what we create by the choices we make in the past life. So I'm not going to explain every link in this chain. It's far too complicated. But obviously the important bit, the thing we can do something about is the present life, okay? The present life. That's what we can do something about. That's where we have a choice. So let's look at that. I'm just going to look at some of that. So down here, down at the very bottom, you might just be able to make out to the right of the tail of the monster, you might be able to make out a couple kissing. A man and a woman kissing. See it? Okay. You can see it. He's right at the back. So this represents what's called contact, which is sparsha in Sanskrit. Contact. And this is the contact between one of our sense organs and some stimulus or other. So it could be anything. It could be something we see. It could be something we hear. It could be something we feel, or so on. It could also be something we think, something we imagine, or something we remember. Because in Buddhism, the mind is seen as one of the sense organs. It's a sense organ that perceives mental objects. So it doesn't have to be something in the outer world. But then on the basis of this contact between one of our sense organs and some stimulus, there arises feeling. Vedana in Sanskrit. Feeling. Should be an arrow there. And this just means the immediate sense of liking or disliking, pleasure or pain. So we see someone we fancy, or we see some appetizing food, or some must-have gadget, and it's like, yes, must have it. Or we see an ugly spider, or a snake, or some mold on something we've just eaten, and it's, ooh, no, don't like it, take it away, take it away. Get it out of my sight. Or we hear someone praising us. Yes, I like it, let's have some more. Or we hear someone criticizing us, or we hear some point of view we don't like, or we hear some politician we hate. It's, no, get it out of there. I don't like it. I don't want it. We imagine what we're going to have for dinner. Yes, yum, yum. Or we remember that argument when we should have said that, and that would have really put them down. But we didn't. And actually, we lost the argument, and we don't like that at all. No. So this feeling, this immediate sense of yes or no, is represented in a very strong image in the Wheel of Life. To the left of the tail, a man with an arrow in his eye. A man with an arrow in his eye. And we might be tempted to think this is way too extreme. But actually, if we allow ourselves to feel our reactions to the things that happen, to what people say, to the things we imagine, the things we remember, I think you'll find that these can often be very, very intense. Very, very intense. What does it feel like in the body to fall out with somebody? Or to hear criticism, or to remember something really embarrassing. It's not just mental, it's in the body. You feel it in the body very intensely. There's no such thing as a mental state. There's psychophysical states. Every feeling is in the body as well as in the mind. If you're angry, it's in the body. If you feel ashamed, it's in the body. So yeah, if some contact produces anger or shame or fear, there's an intense physical reaction if we allow ourselves to be aware of it. So then on the basis of this Vedana, this yes or no, we experience the next step, which is craving, or Trishna in Sanskrit, which means actually thirst. So it can be craving to have something, or it can be craving to get it out of my sight, get it out of here. To blame somebody for what we feel, anger, fear, we want it out of our experience, or we want to distract ourselves from it. We're experiencing unpleasant states, so we turn on the TV, or we go to our phone, or we reach for some chocolate or some beer. Get this unpleasant Vedana out of my experience. And this craving or thirst is represented on the wheel by a woman offering a man a drink. Then in dependence on this craving arises grasping, which is represented by a woman gathering fruit from a tree and sort of putting them in her basket. She's getting them. She's gathering them to herself. It's a grasping attachment. And of course, this part of the wheel, our past leading to sense contact, leading to feeling, leading to craving, leading to grasping, and the way we respond to that leading to the future. That, of course, is the territory of the famous gap that we talk about in introductory classes. Although we don't use this traditional terminology, which I'll explain why in a while. And this gap is the doorway to freedom. It's the doorway off the wheel. It's the place we have a choice where we can choose not to respond automatically to what feels pleasant or unpleasant, but to guide our actions by what's skillful instead. So that instead of going just back round the wheel, all our old patterns creating our future, we step off the wheel onto a brighter new world, which Dharma Maya is going to talk about next week. So someone criticizes us, we feel that unpleasant feeling, that arrow in the eye, but instead of snapping back or going into our shell, we think, oh, maybe they're right. And maybe we apologize. Say, yeah, well, I probably could have done that better. And then our relationship with them is forever different. And we are forever different. And the world is forever different. We live in a different world after that. We've done something different. We see the chocolate, and we decide that we can actually do without a little bit of temporary pleasure. And so we live in a world where we're a bit slimmer. But also a world where we're a bit stronger. More the master or mistress of our own lives, our own fate. So traditionally, this gap that we so often talk about, is talked about as being between feeling and craving. But we don't express it that way in our introductory courses, because this is often not what it doesn't seem like the way we actually experience the gap, or a lot of us don't experience the gap that way. Often the feeling and the craving just seem to come completely together. They're completely tied up. There's no gap between them. If you ask a smoker what they see when they go outside at coffee break and see someone lighting up, they will say, I feel craving. The craving is the feeling. The two are so bound up they can't be separated. So often, most of the time, for most of us, the gap is not between feeling and craving, it's between craving and grasping. It's between craving and acting on our craving. We want to grab the fruit off that tree, but we restrain ourselves and choose not to. So the ex-smoker feels the craving, but decides to stick to their resolution not to smoke. We feel the desire to snap at that person who we've just heard criticism from, and instead we rein ourselves in, decide to think rationally, give ourselves a bit of space, and think about what they said. That's what it usually feels like. It's certainly in my experience, I think in most other people's experience, that it's between the craving and the action on the craving. So in one famous Buddhist text, the Bodhicharya-avatara, the author tells us when the reactive mind wants to do its usual thing, remain like a block of wood. He says, remain like a block of wood. And that is often all we can do. We can remain like a block of wood to give ourselves time to step back, rise above our normal reaction, and maybe do something a bit different. So Shantideva, the author of the Bodhicharya, he really lays it on thick. I am sure he often plays for laughs, okay? But what he says is, when the mind experiences attraction or aversion, we should remain like a block of wood. When the mind is inflated or critical, full of arrogance, dishonest, when it looks down on others, when it blames others, we should remain like a block of wood. The reactive mind is greedy for possessions, respect, status, and fame. It just wants the attention of an audience. It longs to hold forth, caring nothing for the good of others. It's always seeking its own advantage and longing for an opportunity to preach its opinions. It's intolerant, idle, cowardly, disrespectful, foul-mouthed, and biased in its own favour. So we should remain like a block of wood. I don't know if you recognise that. I think I do, actually. I think I recognise that. And if all we can do is remain like a block of wood, then that is a lot better than the alternative. But there's a problem with remaining like a block of wood. That is that what we actually often do is not feel the feeling and remain like a block of wood, but repress the feeling, stay unaware of it, pretending it isn't there. And we can get really good at this. We can get so good at this that we hardly notice our Vedanas at all. And when that happens, our Vedanas, our attractions and aversions, they just rule us from the shadows. They rule us from our unconscious, without us being even aware that they're there. We think, I'm not an angry person, but everyone around us sees us being bitter and sharp and critical, or maybe self-destructive, very harsh on ourselves and others. We are never actually aware of that feeling when we see the chocolate. We just eat it and wonder why, when we step on the scales, we seem to have put on weight. We can allow our Vedanas to rule the way we live without ever being aware that they're there. So to really genuinely be in the gap, we need to start by feeling the Vedana, the arrow in the eye. That's not easy. It sometimes does feel like an arrow in the eye. So try it. You might try now. Remember something that made you feel really ashamed or really angry. And feel it in the body. What does it feel like? I'm tempted to say something you're going to really react to, except that you really wouldn't like me if I did. I think, I don't know if you could do that there. It's a bit glib to say do that, but I'm sure you can remember, and I'm sure if you go away and try it, you will find it. We feel it in our body. We feel it in our chest. We feel it in our muscles. My chapter, we were recently studying something where an order member suggests something he calls reaction practice, and this is precisely what he's suggesting. Really, when somebody says something we don't like, when we remember that argument that we should have just won like that, when we think about that time when we did that, oh my God, did I really say that? Ooh. Sit there and really feel what it feels like. Really feel what it feels like. It's really strong. It's really strong and it's really physical. And it's only when we really get a handle on that we really can start to be in the gap, start to experience that, but do something different. While we're sort of shuffling that under the carpet, it's still going to be affecting us, whether we think it is or not. So, we need to know just how strong our reactions is and just how difficult it is to be in the gap. We talk about it a bit glibly sometimes, but it is really hard. It's really hard. Anyway, you could try. I'm going to suggest you might try this for homework, just getting some experience of really feeling what our reactions feel like in the body. So we usually talk about this. This is the usual gap, isn't it, between contact or feeling, between feeling and craving, or I'm saying between feeling and grasping. This bottom part of the wheel gives us an opportunity to get off the wheel onto something better, a spiral path that leads to somewhere better. But we usually talk about there's just one gap, but actually I think there's more than one gap. There's at least two gaps. And I think there's another gap at contact, actually. Nobody ever talks about this, but we do have a choice about what our senses come into contact with. This is part of the whole basis of the monastic life, surely, that we put ourselves in situations where we don't come into contact with a whole load of things that really trigger negative mental states. If we don't come into contact with sexual stimulation, we feel far less sexual desire and experience more peace, etc. If reading the news makes us depressed or angry, well, we've got a choice about that. We can do it less. A lot of present-day films are so horrendously violent that they must have an effect on our mind. And we can choose not to go there. We can choose not to do that. There's a traditional term for this called guarding the gates of the senses. We can guard the gates of the senses. So we do have a choice about contact. It's not necessarily completely automatic. So we have a choice about our contact as well as the way we react to it. It has to be said that if we deal with our reactions by avoiding the contact, we may just be postponing them to some future time. So we need to sort of watch that, actually. We may never get the practice of really dealing with them, and then some future time we're in a different situation and they'll just hit us like a ton of bricks. As regards contact as well, so our thoughts are also contacts, our imaginings, our rememberings. And there's whole branches of psychotherapy about training ourselves to think in a more positive way. We can get into the habit of just always going to those negative thoughts. So we have a choice as well. We can train ourselves to choose positive mental objects as well. I think there's a lot of that in the Metta Bhavana. If you think about the difficult person, if you think about all the ways they're really difficult, then you will have certain Vedanas and you will have certain thoughts about them. If you think about some different aspect, the way they are with their children, that time that they actually helped you out, well, we'll have a different response to them. So an awful lot of the time it's our thoughts which are creating our Vedanas. So I'd like to say a bit more about that, actually, because we've talked about the gap in the wheel of life. But that is what we've got here is an example of conditionality operating in a reactive circular way, where we just go round and it keeps us going round and round in circles. And we can find a way out of that into a state where conditionality operates in a different way, where one good thing leads to another good thing, leads to a better thing, and so on, a progressive way, which Dharma Maya is going to talk about next week. But this is just one example of the way conditionality can operate in a circular sort of way. It's not the only one. There are other vicious circles talked about in the early Buddhist texts, which present the gap in a very different way, and it's often to do with how we think and how we interpret the world. So there are several suttas that talk about the effect, the way we think and the way we interpret the world how the effect that has on our experience and therefore our responses to the world. And I've sort of tried to combine several of these together into some diagrams. So in this one, we've got our old contact, again, sense contact. Something happens. Let's use an example here. Let's say the situation is our boss has, I don't know where we are, we're in India, I don't know, and our boss has said, would you just go into the cellar and get me that big bottle of water? Okay, so there we go, that's what we're doing. So we go into the cellar and it's very badly lit, and we see this wiggly thing on the floor. And we go, snake! We label it, snake. In fact, it's a piece of rope, okay? The contact can be labeled in different ways. That's what we do. We label our contact in some way or another. It's called samnya in Sanskrit. It's often translated as perception, but it means really labeling. It means the way we decide it's a this, it's a that. So yeah, we samnya. It's a snake when it's a rope. And on the basis of that, well, what do? We get a really strong negative feeling. Oh, no. And on the basis of that, we start thinking, get me out of here, that's dangerous. Yeah, so we think, oh, get me out of here, that's dangerous. And yeah, on the basis of the way we interpret that experience, we start thinking, that's dangerous. And that thinking might be okay, that's fine, that thinking might be okay if it stayed within bounds, But then it strays in what, in Buddhist terminology, Sanskrit is called prapancha, usually translated as mental proliferation. Building whole edifices of imaginings and assumptions and stories. We start telling stories. My boss sent me in here on purpose to frighten me. In fact, he wants to get rid of me. He's a nasty piece of work. I remember that time, etc., etc., etc. So on the basis of our prapancha, we get likes and dislikes. I don't like my boss. And then these likes and dislikes lead to conflict. This is the big emphasis of probably the most famous of these suttas that deal with this, which is the Honeyball Sutta, about how conflict arises. It arises on the basis of prapancha, leading to like and dislike, leading to conflict. According to the Honeyball Sutta, it says something like, it leads to the taking up of sticks and arms. So that's fairly simple, sort of straightforward, linear progression. But it's not as simple as that, because the stories we tell ourselves, our prapancha, strongly influences how we label things, how we perceive. If we think people are all out for themselves, we'll see selfish behavior everywhere. We'll interpret all sorts of behavior as selfish. If we think the council, if we tell all these stories about how the council is useless and never cleans up the streets, we will notice every bit of litter. We will see every bit of litter. Both our eyes will go to it. And we'll be seeing a very untidy, dirty place. If we start telling stories about our boss, how he's got it in for us, that will determine how we label any sense contact that we have with him. So we hear him say something, and we will label it criticism, when it may not be criticism at all. We'll feel negative Vedana, arrow in the eye. And we'll think, there's my boss looking for ways to get at me again. And this turns into even more prapancha, more stories. He wants to sack me. He talks about me behind my back, etc. Even more prapancha, even more dislike, even more tendency for conflict. And also making it all more likely that the next thing our boss says will be interpreted as negative. Even if he says something positive, he's just being ironic, he's being sarcastic this time. We see every expression as dislike. So the stories we tell about things become self-perpetuating. Our ideas that we have, our prapancha becomes self-perpetuating. They determine how we see the world. We make the world conform to our stories. And this is really important. This is really important because at this moment in history, prapancha is rampant. Prapancha is absolutely rampant. And it's leading to extremes of polarization and conflict. It's dividing whole nations into two camps. All about prapancha. Of course, loads of trivial things are prapancha. All fashion, of course, is prapancha. Of course it is. But much more seriously, we can see that wind turbine as great or terrible according to our prapancha. Entirely. Ideologies are all prapancha. Almost all politics is prapancha. And on the basis of this prapancha, our stories, they divide us into us and them. We lose sight of our shared humanity, we lose sight of our reality, and we forget that our stories are just stories. We do not know. We do not know very much about anything, really. Our information is second-hand, etc. And on any subject, there are people who know more than we do, who are at least as bright as us, maybe more bright, who are just as well-intentioned as we are, who hold the opposite view. They are telling a different story. And unless we suss that, well, we're just going to be in for more and more and more conflict. So I've got a couple of suggestions for homework on the basis of this. One is try the reaction practice. Try the reaction practice. Notice when you're really reacting, when the person says this, when that meeting's not going the way you want, when you remember something that really sort of stirs it up, and really sit with it, really feel what it feels like. It can be very, very strong, but try to sit with it and then go beyond it. Go beyond it. But don't just go, oh, give me a beer. Here's the phone. That's the first one. And the second bit of homework I'd like to suggest is to try to sit lightly to views. The wiser we are, the more we will be able to keep sight of the fact that we may well be wrong. And that is a really important way off the wheel. Thank you.